Well, good morning. Today's lesson is on the treatment of subjects. We are in the unit Statistical Studies in the subsection of Statistical Investigations. You've seen research studies, and we've kind of looked at a few examples of them, but did you know that there are laws regarding statistical studies and the treatment of certain subjects, specifically human subjects? Let's look at some of them. So first of all, let's talk about the types of data that are collected when we do research. Okay, there are two ways to categorize data that we collect during research studies according to its source. It all depends on where you get the data that categorizes it. Primary data are data that you collect directly. Sources of this type of data include the following. Experiments. Let's say you conduct experiments on something, and the data you collect from that experiment is your own primary data. Survey instruments. Let's say that we've created a survey and we've polled some people about certain questions. That data is your own data. It's primary data. And observation instruments, let's look at this from the perspective of, facial recognition. The government has these computers that can look at the cameras all over the world and recognize people's faces. That's primary data for the government. Okay, so primary data. Data that you collect directly. When collecting primary data, most researchers run what's called a pilot study. And a pilot study is a small scale version of the research plan. And what are some reasons to run a pilot study? And I'll be honest with you, this is the one that stands out to me because I'm a business person. Most pilot studies are initiated to test a new market, to see if a product will work in a new area. So for instance, you ever heard of a pop-up store? They're all over the place. Pop-up stores are really they're really research test studies to see if people are interested in specific products. So some of these food companies will bring a cater truck up to a particular area to see if it works. Right now they have a Double Dave's truck trailer up in Hearn, and it seems to be doing really well. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed that works out and we get a Double Dave's up in Hearn, which is closer to my house than driving all the way to Bryan to get Double Dave's. Anyway, that's me. All right, secondary data are data that have been collected by someone else and are available to the researcher. Many of you are already looking at this sentence and looking, why do they call data a plural? Because data is plural. You have more than one piece of datum. Datum is single, or the singular version of data. Data is plural. So that's why secondary data are, secondary datum would be is. So just so you know, that's why you use are. Data is the plural. Datum is, or datum, whatever you want to say, is actually the singular. Okay. So secondary data are data that have been collected by someone else and are available to the researcher. Following are examples of this type of data. A lot of you have used this, the internet. Now, you need to be wary of the internet. A lot of people are like, well, it's on the internet, it's got to be true. No, not so. So there are certain websites that we can include as empirical evidence, and we've used that word before. You do an experiment and you collect data, and that data, primary data, is empirical evidence. But if you're collecting data from some other source, you need to be wary of its origins. So when we go on the internet and we collect information or data, we need to include websites that are trustworthy, such as the U.S. Census Bureau or other government sites. I would also include certain learning facilities, colleges and universities, printed materials such as books, almanacs, newspapers, and magazines, and of course, historical documents. A lot of historical documents have so much truth in them. I mean, we have to live by them. A lot of people realize that the Bible is a very large and documented historical document that talks about the story of humans for millennia. So it's not the only one around, it's the one that stands out and the most publicized publication in history. So, all right, when using secondary data, part of the research plan must include ensuring that the data are reliable. Now, I already mentioned this, but when you collect primary data, you're responsible for doing everything possible to ensure that your participants are well informed and safe. So you see, you have to have safeguards for both types of data you collect. Okay. Participants, this is a definition. I would definitely understand anything that is highlighted or emboldened or what's the word I'm looking for? Italicized. Participants is a definition I would put on my notes for upcoming test on my cheat sheet. Are people who participate in human subject research by being the target of observation by researchers. Understand the participants do not have to be human subjects. They can be animals, plants, etc. Let's think back. What was the type of participant we used when we talked about those potato chips? They weren't humans. They're chips, right? Go ahead. Don't worry about hurting me. One nice thing about potato chip study is that researchers don't have to worry about hurting the chips. And the chips don't need to give us their permission. With human participants, we have to be a lot more careful. So this is something we should really understand, and I would write this down on the right side of this page and understand exactly what it means. This is the gist of this lesson. We're talking about the treatment of subject. When we say the treatment of subject, we're talking about humans. And this also can go along with animals too. National Commission for Protection of Human Subjects in Biomedical and Behavioral Research was created by the 1974 enactment of the National Research Act. Remember where it came from and the year it came. That will be on the test. This commission had a purpose to identify the basic ethical principles that should underlie the conduct of biomedical and behavioral research involving human subjects, and to develop guidelines which should be followed to assure that such research is conducted in accordance with these principles. This is from the Office of Human Subjects Research on the National Institutes of Health website, and it shows the website down at the bottom. The commission developed the following 4 guidelines. A, ethical principles and guidelines for research involving human subjects. Really, that's a title. I don't know why it's considered a subject, but it is. Boundaries between practice and research. We're not going to go into details on those 2 subjects. We are going to go into details in the last 2 because each one of the bullet points in the basic ethical principles has an application in D bullet points. So, basic ethical principles, respect for persons. Obviously, when we do research, we want to make sure we respect the people that are involved in the research. And we're not talking about the researchers. We're talking about the volunteers, the participants, people that are being researched. And then beneficence. We'll talk about what that means here in a minute, and justice. So the applications are threefold, just like the basic ethical principles, and those threefold applications correspond to the exact same basic ethical principles that are also threefold. So informed consent is respect for persons. Informed consent simply means we're going to make sure that whoever does this survey, whoever is involved in this experiment or this research study is informed of both the benefit or the risks that are involved with taking this thing. We're going to make sure that they know that they are what is involved. 2, the beneficence, assessment of risk and benefits. That goes along with informed consent. We have to be perfect and tell them exactly what the risks that are involved and the benefits that are involved so they know. Informed consent involves that. And 3, justice. The application goes with that as selection of subjects. We have to be fair in the way we select our subjects, especially if there's compensation involved. We can only select subjects that fit into the sample of what we're working on, okay? So if that doesn't fit, we're going to have to worry about something else. Selection of subjects is very important. If we're studying the effect of a medicine on warts and you get someone that is wart-free, it's kind of pointless to have them in your research study. So selection of subjects is very important. It needs to be justified, needs to be useful, and it needs to be fair to all involved. All right, so issues related with these guidelines include protection of vulnerable subjects, recruiting volunteers, payment of volunteers, and so on. To ensure the researchers follow these guidelines, research facilities have IRBs, institutional review boards, that must approve all study design plans. Now, if a facility doesn't have its own IRB, it must contract with an outside source. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Food and Drug Administration performs inspections of IRBs to ensure that they're working effectively. Now, this little section right here, I would subject it to memory or write it on your cheat sheet because it will be on the test. Understand what an IRB is and what it's used for and what a company is responsible for when it comes to an IRB. They either have to have one or they have to contract one with an outside source. And what is the Reason for an IRB, it approves all design studies at a company. And who makes sure that the IRBs are working effectively? The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Food and Drug Administration. So make sure you know all of that. All right. Now let's describe why special classes of human subjects need special protection. Let's select choices from the following list. Why would a fetus need special protection? Think about that for a second. And when you watch this, if you're in the class, I want you to bring it up, not just fetus, but any of these. If they pique your interest or they selectively hit a trigger on you and you want to talk about it, by all means, we need to talk about it because different human subjects do need special protection. And we need to know why before we do any kind of study. So fetuses, women, children and minors, cognitively impaired persons. And we're talking about people that are developmentally delayed. You might call them slow, or they just don't learn the same way as us, or the same way as a normal-minded person. Not to say that they're not normal-minded, but to say that they are not cognitively as equal as some other people. They're impaired. Prisoners, people that are locked up. Traumatized or comatose patients. Understand, you're going to go back and look at these situations right here to determine whether or not they deserve some kind of ethical treatment. So, terminally ill patients, elderly or aged people, minority students or employees. Now, think about this for a second. Why would any of these need special protection? So, think about these. Protection against identity theft. HIPAA. Accessibility to persons who might not want their identity revealed in any way. Witness protection programs, custody issues, illegal residents. I think that's an answer for something else, but let's look at why they need special protection. What about fetuses? Can they give informed consent? No, they can't, can they? Children or minors, are they able to give informed consent? No, they're not an adult. They can't give informed consent. You can tell them what's going on, but they may not understand because they don't have the understanding of what's going on. Women, now they are cognitively able to understand what's going on. They do need special protection because it depends on the type of study that's going on. Some women are more susceptible to things than men are. And I'm not saying that women aren't equal. I'm talking about, let's say it's some kind of x-ray. Women are more susceptible to those kind of things than men are because they have more body organs that are more susceptible to cancer. Cognitively impaired persons, along with fetuses and minors, they are not able to give good informed consent. Now, prisoners, they don't have the same freedoms we do. They may think cognitively that if they don't do this survey or they don't do this experiment, they might get penalized for it. So that's the issue right there. Prisoners are not good subjects to use as participants in a research study. Traumatized or comatose patients. Once again, those people cannot give good informed consent. They can't consent to something they don't understand or they can't even give consent to. Terminally ill patients are not in the frame of mind to do it because they'll do anything to try to save their life. Elderly or aged persons, some of them are stricken with diseases or infirmities that might prevent them from giving a good, solid consent to whatever it is they're doing because they may have, like, I don't know, Alzheimer's or Lou Gehrig's disease. Minorities, it depends. This is a fact. African Americans are more susceptible to a disease called sickle cell anemia. As a matter of fact, they're the only race that is stricken by it. And so if it is a study on that, they would be the first ones chosen. But if the study would effectively give them that particular disease, it's not fair to them because other people wouldn't get it. Students or employees. Students or employees, and the same reason prisoners might feel obliged to do it, students or employees might be the same way. Students might feel that they have to do the study or they might be penalized grade-wise, and employees may feel they have to get the study or they may be fired. So those are some good reasons why special classes of human subjects need special protection. All right. Could excluding a class of people from research studies be dangerous? Now let's look at the answer that the book gave us. If a class is excluded, we never learn anything about it. For example, if children are excluded from a specific medical research, as it often happens because they can't get informed consent, You don't know whether a new medicine will help or harm them. And that can be an issue, especially when it comes to things like childhood cancer. Now, how can a survey or questionnaire be dangerous to participants? Now, think about that. They're just answering questions. How can that hurt them? Well, here's a reason why. If they are sensitive in nature, questions about diseases, medical records, criminal records, drug use, and so on, the confidentiality of the study is breached, the participant could suffer adverse consequences. Not to mention that the embarrassment of answering those questions may actually bias those questions. And we'll talk about bias in another section in this unit. Why is informed consent of human subject important to a researcher? Well, here it is. It must be in the language understandable to the participant. Let's say you have a informed consent document that is in English, but the subject, the participant only understands Chinese. So a Chinese person or an illiterate person, let's use that example too, they can have the study explained verbally and the consent can be videotaped. So if they do understand it in a different language and we actually videotape their consent, that would be work. And the participant doesn't waive their rights, and it must be made aware the participation is voluntary. So volunteer participation is very important when it comes to research study. They must understand the purpose of the research, the procedures, the length of the time agreed to, and whether placebos will be used. We already discussed what a placebo is. And if so, that they may receive a placebo instead of an active ingredient treatment. Risks must be thoroughly explained and alternative treatments described, and confidentiality statements must be included and abided by both sides of the study, both the researchers and the research participants. And participants must know who will answer questions if they have any. All right, what factors should a researcher consider in deciding whether to pay volunteers to participate in the study? It is legal for volunteers to be paid for research participation as a recruitment incentive. You're going to see a lot of them around Texas A&M because they have a lot of research facilities around the campus, and they pay people for a lot of things. So it's especially common with when the health benefits to participants are remote or non-existent. For instance, there's not a lot of health benefits around for diseases like, cancer, for instance. They're very remote. You have to go somewhere to get them. If it's a research study locally, here in Bryan College Station, it may prevent them from having to go all the way down to Houston to get treatment. The amount must be designated in advance and should not be large enough to unfairly influence someone to participate. In other words, it can't make it really, hey, I can live off this. Participants must be paid even when they withdraw from the study early. Now, that's important to understand. If you get into the study and they feel like they're having adverse effects, you can't be penalized for making them leave early simply because it's hurting them. That's not fair to the people. All right, now I'm going to launch you with this. If you're curious as to why there are so many laws regarding research, I want you to look at this example of an extremely poor treatment of subject. This gentleman right here, his name is Jesse Gilsinger. He was volunteered to participate in a gene therapy experiment, and his death happened because of this. It was reported in the study, and since the whole study has been halted, this was back in '99. He had a rare metabolic disease. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. It prevents the body from properly processing nitrogen. In Jesse's case, the virus was used to carry the gene into his liver to cure his disease instead of give him a huge liver infection. It gave him a huge liver infection because that led to a coma, and because his body couldn't handle the nitrogen that occurs when a person has a big infection, he passed away. So, yes, these laws are there for a reason. It's to safeguard against things like this. And remember, this law was passed in 1974, and this happened in '99. So, there has to be these things in place. There are checks and balances. Anyway, there is an assignment in the Google Classroom. Go check it out, take care of it, and get it turned in as soon as possible. In the meantime, be blessed and be a blessing.